Hey amazing people, we're pushing towards 5k subscribers and your support means everything. If you're enjoying the content, every like and comment helps YouTube share our videos with more awesome people like you. Now let's dive into today's video. In the year 2045, a team of NASA scientists led by Dr. Amelia Novak made a groundbreaking discovery while studying radio telescope data from Venus. A mysterious signal, unlike anything they had ever encountered, was emanating from the planet's surface. The signal contained a complex pattern that repeated every 3.14 seconds, suggesting an intelligent origin. Dr. Novak, a brilliant astrophysicist with a keen intuition, knew that this discovery could change the course of human history. She had immediately brought the findings to her superiors, who were initially skeptical but soon realized the magnitude of the situation. They decided to keep the discovery under wraps, fearing the potential consequences of public knowledge about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. As the news spread through NASA's top-secret channels, a sense of excitement and trepidation grew among the scientists. Some believed that the signal could be a message from an advanced alien civilization, while others cautioned that it might be a natural phenomenon or even a trap. Despite the differing opinions, one thing was clear: they needed to investigate the source of the signal. NASA quickly assembled a team of the world's most brilliant minds to analyze the data and devise a plan. Dr. Novak was appointed as the lead scientist, and she worked tirelessly to unravel the mysteries of the signal. As the weeks turned into months, the team made slow but steady progress, piecing together fragments of information that hinted at the existence of an alien presence on Venus. The more they studied the signal, the more they realized that it was not just a simple message, but a complex set of instructions. It seemed to be guiding them towards a specific location on the Venusian surface, an area that had previously been considered uninhabitable due to the planet's extreme temperatures and toxic atmosphere. As the team delved deeper into the data, they discovered that the signal was not only coming from Venus, but also had been transmitting for thousands of years. This revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific community, as it implied that the aliens, if they existed, had been aware of Earth's presence for a very long time. With each passing day, the urgency to investigate the signal grew stronger. NASA knew that they needed to act fast, as other space agencies around the world were likely to have picked up on the signal as well. They could not risk losing the opportunity to make first contact with an alien species. After months of intense preparations, NASA finally announced that they would be sending a manned mission to Venus to investigate the source of the signal. The news was met with a mixture of excitement and fear, as the public grappled with the idea of humans encountering extraterrestrial life for the first time. As the world watched in anticipation, NASA began the process of selecting the crew for the mission. They needed individuals with exceptional skills, unwavering courage, and the ability to work under extreme pressure. The fate of humanity rested on the shoulders of those chosen for this historic journey. Little did they know that the discovery of the signal was only the beginning of a terrifying odyssey that would push the boundaries of human understanding and challenge everything they thought they knew about the universe. The true nature of the signal and the alien presence on Venus was about to be revealed, and it would change the course of human history forever. NASA's rigorous selection process for the Venus mission was unlike anything ever seen before. They needed a crew that could not only withstand the physical and mental challenges of the journey, but also had the expertise to investigate the alien signal and potentially make contact with extraterrestrial life. After months of intense evaluations, 4 individuals were chosen for the mission. Captain Liam Johnson, a seasoned astronaut with a decade of experience in space exploration, was selected as the mission commander. His calm demeanor and quick thinking under pressure made him the perfect candidate to lead the crew. Dr. Evelyn Pearce, a brilliant xenobiologist with a passion for studying exotic life forms, was chosen as the mission's lead scientist. Her expertise in extraterrestrial biology would be crucial in understanding any alien life they might encounter on Venus. Dr. Marcus Kim, an astrophysicist with a keen eye for detail, was selected to analyze the alien signal and decipher its meaning. His knowledge of advanced physics and mathematics would be invaluable in understanding the technology behind the signal. Finally, Rachel Thompson, a gifted engineer with a knack for fixing any mechanical problem, was chosen to maintain the mission's equipment and ensure that the spacecraft remained operational in the hostile Venusian environment. The 4 crew members were brought together at NASA's top-secret training facility, where they underwent months of intensive preparation. They trained in simulated Venusian environments, learning how to navigate the planet's treacherous terrain and survive in its toxic atmosphere. As they worked together, the crew formed a tight-knit bond, each relying on the other's strengths to overcome the challenges they faced. Captain Johnson's leadership skills kept them focused on the mission, while Dr. Pearce's curiosity and Dr. Kim's analytical mind pushed them to dig deeper into the mysteries of the alien signal. Rachel, the youngest member of the crew, quickly proved her worth with her innovative solutions to the technical problems they encountered. Her quick thinking and improvisation skills would later prove to be invaluable in the face of unforeseen dangers. As the training intensified, the crew was subjected to numerous psychological evaluations to ensure that they could handle the isolation and stress of the mission. They were pushed to their limits, both physically and mentally, as NASA sought to prepare them for any eventuality. Throughout the training, the crew was kept in the dark about the true nature of the mission. They knew that they were being sent to investigate a signal from Venus, but the details of the signal and its potential implications were kept classified. As the launch date approached, the crew grew increasingly anxious. They knew that they were about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever, but they could never have imagined the horrors that awaited them on Venus. The night before the launch, Captain Johnson gathered the crew together for a final briefing. As he looked around at the faces of his team, he saw a mixture of excitement, fear, and determination. He knew that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. With a final nod, Captain Johnson led his crew to the spacecraft that would carry them to Venus. As they boarded the Prometheus, a sense of destiny settled over them. They were about to make history, but little did they know that their journey would be one of terror and sacrifice. As the engines roared to life and the spacecraft lifted off from the launch pad, the crew looked out at the receding Earth, wondering if they would ever see their home again. The journey to Venus had begun, and there was no turning back. As the Prometheus hurtled through the vast expanse of space, the crew settled into their daily routines. The journey to Venus would take 6 months, and they needed to maintain their physical and mental health to be ready for whatever awaited them on the mysterious planet. Captain Johnson kept a watchful eye on his crew, ensuring that they followed a strict schedule of exercise, meditation, and team-building activities. He knew that the success of the mission depended on their ability to work together seamlessly. Dr. Pearce spent her days studying the limited data they had on the alien signal, trying to glean any information that could help them understand what they were facing. She pored over the complex patterns, searching for any clues that could shed light on the nature of the extraterrestrial intelligence behind it. Dr. Kim, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to refine the spacecraft's sensors and communication systems. He knew that they would need every advantage they could get once they reached Venus, and he was determined to give them the best possible chance of success. Rachel, the engineer, kept the Prometheus running smoothly, fixing any malfunctions that arose and ensuring that the life support systems were functioning at optimal levels. Her skills were put to the test when a critical component of the ship's cooling system failed, threatening to overheat the entire spacecraft. As Rachel worked frantically to repair the damage, Captain Johnson and the other crew members watched in tense silence. They knew that if Rachel couldn't fix the problem, they would have to abort the mission and return to Earth. But Rachel refused to give up. With sweat pouring down her face and her hands shaking from exhaustion, she'd finally managed to bypass the damaged component and restore the cooling system to full functionality. The crew erupted in cheers and applause, grateful for Rachel's skill and determination. As the weeks turned into months, the crew began to notice strange occurrences aboard the ship. At first, they dismissed them as the result of the long journey and the isolation of deep space. But as the incidents became more frequent and more unsettling, they couldn't ignore them any longer. It started with small things, like equipment malfunctioning for no apparent reason, or lights flickering in empty corridors. But then the crew began to hear whispers in the communication system, eerie voices that seemed to be calling out to them from the depths of space. Dr. Pearce was the first to suggest that the whispers might be related to the alien signal. She theorized that the extraterrestrial intelligence behind the signal might be trying to communicate with them, using the ship's systems as a conduit. Captain Johnson was skeptical at first, but as the whispers grew louder and more insistent, he couldn't deny that something strange was happening. He ordered Dr. Kim to scan the ship for any signs of external interference, but the scans came back clean. As the Prometheus drew closer to Venus, the tension among the crew members began to mount. They knew that they were on the verge of a historic discovery, but they also couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by an unseen presence. One night, as the crew gathered for dinner in the ship's galley, the lights suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency backup lighting kicked in a few seconds later, but in that brief moment of darkness, they all heard it. A voice whispering in their ears, "Welcome to Venus." The crew looked at each other in shock and disbelief, trying to process what had just happened. They knew that they were no longer alone in the universe, but they had no idea what kind of intelligence they were dealing with. As the Prometheus entered Venus's orbit and began its descent to the surface, the crew steeled themselves for whatever lay ahead. They knew that they were about to face the unknown, and that their lives would never be the same again. As the Prometheus descended through the thick, toxic atmosphere of Venus, the crew held their breath in anticipation. The spacecraft shuddered and groaned under the immense pressure, but Rachel's expert engineering held strong. After what felt like an eternity, the ship finally broke through the clouds and the surface of Venus came into view. The sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The landscape was a hellish vision of jagged rock formations, deep crevasses and swirling clouds of sulfuric acid. The temperature outside the ship was a scorching 900 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead. But as the Prometheus approached the coordinates of the alien signal, something strange happened. The harsh conditions on Venus seemed to miraculously dissipate in a localized area around the landing site. The temperature dropped to a more manageable level, and the toxic atmosphere cleared, revealing a flat, rocky plain that seemed to have been intentionally cleared for their arrival. Captain Johnson exchanged a look of disbelief with his crew as they watched the impossible unfold before their eyes. They knew that something incredible was waiting for them on the surface, but they also couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept up their spines. As the Prometheus touched down on the surface of Venus, the crew wasted no time in preparing for their mission. They donned their state-of-the-art spacesuits, equipped with advanced life support systems, and built to withstand the harsh Venusian environment. Dr. Pearce could barely contain her excitement as she checked and double-checked her scientific instruments. She knew that she was about to step foot on a world that had never been explored by humans before, and the prospect of discovering new forms of life was almost too much to bear. Dr. Kim, meanwhile, focused on calibrating the ship's sensors to detect any signs of the alien signal. He knew that they needed to find the source of the signal quickly, before any other space agencies could beat them to it. Rachel made final checks on the ship's systems, ensuring that everything was in working order for their return journey. She tried to ignore the growing sense of dread that gnawed at the back of her mind, telling herself that it was just nerves. As the crew gathered at the airlock, ready to disembark, Captain Johnson turned to face them. "We've trained for this moment for months," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We are the first humans to set foot on Venus, and we have a job to do. Stay focused, stay alert, and most importantly, stay safe. We don't know what we're going to find out there, but I have faith in each and every one of you. Let's make history." With those final words, Captain Johnson opened the airlock, and the crew stepped out onto the surface of Venus. The ground beneath their feet was solid and stable, a far cry from the treacherous terrain they had expected. As they took their first steps, a sense of wonder and awe washed over them. They were standing on an alien world, a place where no human had ever set foot before. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating, but as they scanned their surroundings, they noticed something strange. The rocky plain seemed to stretch out in all directions, but there was a faint trail of light emanating from a point in the distance. It was the same eerie light that had haunted their dreams during the long journey to Venus. Without a word, the crew set off towards the light, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that whatever lay ahead would change the course of human history, but they also couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. As they followed the trail of light, they had no idea that they were about to stumble upon a discovery that would shatter their understanding of the universe and the nature of existence itself. The journey was far from over, and the true horror was yet to come. As the crew followed the trail of light, they found themselves descending into a deep, winding cavern. The walls of the cavern were smooth and polished, as if they had been carved by some advanced technology. The light grew brighter as they went deeper, and they could feel a strange energy pulsing through the air. After what felt like hours of walking, they finally emerged into a massive underground chamber. The sight that greeted them was beyond anything they could have imagined. In the center of the chamber stood a towering structure, easily hundreds of feet tall. It was made of a strange, iridescent material that seemed to shift and change color as they looked at it. The structure was covered in intricate carvings and symbols, unlike anything they had ever seen before. Dr. Pearce let out a gasp of amazement as she took in the sight. "This is incredible," she breathed. "The technology required to build something like this. It's beyond anything we've ever encountered." Dr. Kim nodded in agreement, his eyes wide with wonder. "And the energy readings, they're off the charts. This place is generating more power than a dozen nuclear reactors." As they approached the structure, they noticed that the carvings seemed to tell a story. They depicted strange, alien creatures with elongated limbs and large, bulbous heads. The creatures seemed to be engaged in some kind of ritual or ceremony, and the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Captain Johnson ordered the team to split up and explore the chamber, searching for any clues that could help them understand the purpose of the structure. Dr. Pearce and Dr. Kim set off to examine the carvings more closely, while Rachel and Captain Johnson investigated the strange energy readings. As they explored deeper into the structure, they discovered a series of tunnels and chambers that seemed to go on forever. Each chamber was filled with strange alien technology that defied explanation. There were machines that pulsed with energy, strange artifacts that seemed to defy the laws of physics, and eerie, glowing orbs that floated in the air. But it was in one of the deepest chambers that they made their most shocking discovery. In the center of the room stood a massive circular device that seemed to be the source of the alien signal. It was surrounded by a series of consoles and screens that displayed strange alien symbols and diagrams. As Dr. Kim approached the device, he let out a gasp of shock. "My God," he whispered, "this technology, it's not just advanced, it's beyond anything we could have imagined. This device, it's capable of manipulating space and time itself." Dr. Pearce joined him at the console, her eyes wide with disbelief. "And look at these symbols," she said, pointing to one of the screens. "They're not just random, they're a language that's been used to communicate with other species across the galaxy." As they pored over the data, a terrible realization began to dawn on them. The aliens who had built this base hadn't just been observing Earth, they had been manipulating it, guiding the course of human history for their own mysterious purposes. Captain Johnson felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the device. He knew that they had stumbled upon something that could change the course of human history, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that they were in terrible danger. Suddenly, an alarm began to sound throughout the chamber. The consoles started flashing with strange, urgent symbols, and the crew could feel the ground beneath their feet beginning to shake. "We need to get out of here," Captain Johnson yelled, grabbing Dr. Pearce and Dr. Kim by the arms. "Something's coming, something big." As they raced back through the tunnels, they could hear a terrible sound echoing through the structure. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a sound that filled them with a sense of dread and horror. And then they saw it. A massive alien creature, larger than anything they had ever seen before. It had a long serpentine body and a head that seemed to be made entirely of teeth, and it was coming straight for them. The crew ran for their lives, their hearts pounding in their chests as they raced towards the entrance of the cavern. They could hear the creature behind them, its massive body crashing through the tunnels and chambers. As they finally emerged into the open air, they saw that the landscape around them had changed. The once flat plain was now a twisted, nightmarish landscape, filled with jagged rock formations and swirling toxic clouds. And in the distance, they could see the silhouette of the Prometheus, waiting for them. But as they raced towards the ship, they realized with a sinking feeling that they might already be too late. The alien base had been a trap, and they had fallen right into it. And now the true horror was about to begin. As the crew raced towards the Prometheus, they could feel the ground shaking beneath their feet. The alien creature was still pursuing them, its massive body tearing through the rocky landscape like a hot knife through butter. They finally reached the ship and scrambled inside, sealing the airlock behind them. Captain Johnson ordered Rachel to prepare for immediate takeoff, while Dr. Pearce and Dr. Kim rushed to the ship's medical bay. Inside the medical bay, Dr. Pearce made a shocking discovery. One of the stasis pods, which had been used to store biological samples during the journey, was now occupied by a strange, alien creature. The creature was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It had a humanoid body, but its skin was a sickly, greyish-green colour, and its eyes were large and black, with no visible pupils. It seemed to be in a state of suspended animation, but as Dr. Pearce approached the pod, its eyes suddenly snapped open. Dr. Pearce let out a scream of terror as the creature lunged forward, its long, spindly arms reaching out to grab her. She stumbled backwards, tripping over a piece of equipment and falling to the ground. Dr. Kim rushed to her aid, grabbing a nearby fire extinguisher and using it to bash the creature back into the stasis pod. He slammed the door shut and engaged the pod's locking mechanism, trapping the creature inside. But as they stared at the pod in horror, they realized that the creature was not alone. All around them, the other stasis pods began to hiss and whir, as if they were coming to life. Captain Johnson's voice crackled over the intercom, urging them to return to the bridge. Dr. Pearce and Dr. Kim exchanged a look of terror before rushing out of the medical bay, sealing the door behind them. On the bridge, Captain Johnson was desperately trying to get the ship's engines online, but as he worked, a terrible realization began to dawn on him. "The signal," he muttered, his eyes widening in horror. "It was a trap. The aliens. They wanted us to find them. They wanted us to bring them back to Earth." Dr. Pearce and Dr. Kim burst onto the bridge, their faces pale with fear. "Captain," Dr. Pearce gasped, "the stasis pods. They're not just samples, they're alive. The aliens. They're here, on the ship." Captain Johnson felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that they had to get off of Venus, and fast. But as he looked out the window, he saw that the alien creature was still pursuing them, its massive body growing closer and closer. Suddenly, the ship's sensors began to beep urgently. Dr. Kim rushed to the console, his face growing pale while he read the data. "Oh my God," he whispered. "The aliens, they're not just here. They're everywhere. They've been hiding in plain sight, on Earth, for centuries. They've been manipulating us, guiding us towards this moment." Captain Johnson felt a sense of dread wash over him. He knew that they had stumbled upon a conspiracy that went far beyond anything they had ever imagined. And now they were the only ones who knew the truth. As the alien creature drew closer, Captain Johnson made a decision. He ordered Rachel to engage the ship's thrusters, lifting them off the surface of Venus and into the sky. But as they rose higher and higher, they saw that the landscape below them was changing. The rocky plains and jagged mountains were shifting and morphing, revealing a vast underground network of tunnels and chambers. And then they saw it. A massive alien ship rising up from the depths of the planet. It was larger than anything they had ever seen, a behemoth of alien technology and power. The crew watched in horror as the ship rose higher and higher until it was level with the Prometheus. And then a voice spoke, echoing through the ship's communication system. "Welcome, humans," the voice said, its tone cold and inhuman. "You have served your purpose. Now it is time for you to die." The crew of the Prometheus could only watch in terror as the alien ship began to power up its weapons, aiming them directly at the tiny, insignificant human vessel. They had come to Venus seeking answers, but now they realized that they had only scratched the surface of a terrible, cosmic truth. The aliens had been watching them, manipulating them, guiding them towards this moment. And now, the fate of humanity itself hung in the balance. As the massive alien ship loomed over the Prometheus, the crew could feel a sense of pure, unadulterated terror washing over them. The voice that had spoken to them was cold, emotionless, and utterly alien. It was clear that the beings they were dealing with were not just technologically advanced, but completely different from anything they had ever encountered before. Captain Johnson gripped the controls of the ship tightly, his knuckles turning white as he tried to maneuver them away from the alien vessel. But it was no use. The Prometheus was tiny in comparison, a mere speck of dust against the behemoth that hung in the sky above them. Suddenly, the alien ship began to shimmer and shift, its surface rippling like water. The crew watched in horror as a massive serpentine creature emerged from the depths of the ship, its long, sinuous body coiling around the Prometheus like a snake. The creature's head was a nightmare of teeth and eyes, its maw gaping wide as it let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the ship. The crew could feel the vibrations in their bones, a primal, visceral terror that threatened to overwhelm them. Dr. Pearce let out a scream of pure, unbridled fear as the creature's massive clawed hand reached out towards the Prometheus. She could see the alien's eyes, cold and unblinking, staring directly at her through the ship's view screen. Captain Johnson fired the ship's thrusters, desperately trying to break free from the creature's grip. But it was no use. The Prometheus was caught in the alien's grasp, and there was no escape. Suddenly, the ship's sensors began to beep urgently once again. Dr. Kim rushed to the console, his face growing pale as he read the data. "Captain," he said, his voice shaking with fear, "the creatures from the stasis pods, they're loose on the ship. They're hunting us." Captain Johnson felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that they were facing an enemy that was not just physically powerful, but also cunning and intelligent. The aliens had planned this from the beginning, luring them to Venus and trapping them in a web of their own making. The crew could hear the sound of skittering, scrabbling claws echoing through the ship's corridors. They knew that the creatures were coming for them, driven by an insatiable hunger and an alien intelligence that was beyond their comprehension. Dr. Pearce and Dr. Kim rushed to seal off the bridge, barricading the doors with whatever they could find. Rachel worked frantically to keep the ship's systems online, trying to find some way to break free from the aliens' grip. But it was no use. The creatures were relentless, their strength and speed far beyond anything the humans could match. One by one, the crew members were picked off, their screams echoing through the ship as they were dragged away into the darkness. Captain Johnson watched in horror as Dr. Pearce was seized by one of the creatures, her body convulsing as the alien's claws sank into her flesh. He could see the light fading from her eyes as the creature dragged her away, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. And then, suddenly, the alien ship began to move. It was pulling the Prometheus closer, drawing it into the depths of its massive, gaping maw. Captain Johnson knew that they were out of time. He looked around at the few remaining members of his crew, their faces etched with fear and desperation. "We have to destroy the ship," he said, his voice cold and determined. "We can't let the aliens take us. We can't let them reach Earth." The crew nodded in agreement, their eyes wide with terror and resolve. They knew that they were facing an enemy that was beyond anything they had ever imagined, an enemy that threatened the very existence of humanity itself. As the Prometheus was drawn closer and closer to the alien ship, Captain Johnson and his crew prepared to make their final stand. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find, ready to fight to the last breath. But deep down they knew that it was hopeless. They were facing an enemy that was far beyond their understanding, an enemy that had been planning this moment for longer than human civilization had existed. And as the darkness closed in around them, they could only pray that their sacrifice would not be in vain, that somehow, against all odds, humanity would find a way to survive the coming storm. As the crew of the Prometheus prepared for their final stand against the alien threat, Dr. Marcus Kim worked frantically at the ship's computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he tried to find some way to gain an advantage over their enemy. Suddenly, he let out a gasp of shock and disbelief. The data on the screen in front of him was telling an impossible story, a story of betrayal and deceit that went back decades. "Captain," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "we've been set up. The mission, the signal, everything. It was all a lie." Captain Johnson turned to face him, his eyes widening in surprise. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" he asked. Dr. Kim took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he spoke. "The government, they've known about the aliens for years. They've been working with them, helping them to infiltrate our society and manipulate us from the shadows." Rachel and Captain Johnson exchanged a look of shock and horror. They had always known that there were secrets hidden within the halls of power, but this was beyond anything they had ever imagined. "And that's not all," Dr. Kim continued, his voice growing more desperate with each passing moment. "I've been working with them too. They promised me power, knowledge, everything I ever wanted. All I had to do was help them to lure you here, to this place, where they could finally claim their prize." Captain Johnson felt a wave of rage and betrayal wash over him. He had trusted Dr. Kim, had believed in him, and now he knew that it had all been a lie. "You bastard!" he growled, lunging forward and grabbing Dr. Kim by the throat. "You've doomed us all." But Dr. Kim only laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that echoed through the ship's corridors. "Don't you see, Captain?" he said. "We were always doomed. The aliens, they're not just here for us, they're here for everything. They want to consume our world, to absorb it into their own, and there's nothing we can do to stop them." Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently, throwing Captain Johnson and Dr. Kim to the ground. Rachel ran to the console, her eyes widening in horror as she saw the data on the screen. "The alien ship, it's firing on us!" she cried out. "Our shields are failing!" Captain Johnson stumbled to his feet, his eyes blazing with fury. He knew that they had only one chance left, one final, desperate gambit that might just buy them the time they needed to escape. "Rachel," he barked, "prepare the self-destruct sequence. We're going to blow this ship to hell and take those bastards with us." Rachel nodded, her fingers flying over the console as she entered the necessary commands. Dr. Kim, seeing what they were doing, let out a howl of rage and lunged at her, trying to stop her from completing the sequence. But Captain Johnson was faster. He grabbed Dr. Kim by the arm and spun him around, delivering a devastating punch to the jaw that sent the traitorous scientist sprawling to the ground. "You're done, Marcus," he growled. "You're done." With Dr. Kim out of the way, Rachel finished entering the self-destruct sequence. The ship's computer began to count down, its voice echoing through the corridors like a death knell. "Self-destruct in T-minus 60 seconds. Captain Johnson turned to Rachel, his eyes softening for a moment as he saw the fear and determination on her face. "We need to get to the escape pods," he said. "It's our only chance." Rachel nodded, and together they raced through the ship's corridors, dodging the alien creatures that lurked in every shadow. They could hear the sounds of the ship tearing itself apart around them, the metal groaning and shrieking as the self-destruct sequence counted down. Finally, they reached the escape pod bay. Captain Johnson punched in the access code, and the doors slid open with a hiss. But as they stepped inside, they saw that Dr. Kim was already there, waiting for them. He had a gun in his hand and a cold, cruel smile on his face. "Going somewhere, Captain?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Captain Johnson and Rachel exchanged a look of desperation. They knew that they were out of time, out of options. The self-destruct sequence was ticking down, and the alien ship was closing in, ready to consume them all. And so, with a final, defiant cry, they charged forward, ready to face their fate, whatever it might be. The betrayal of Dr. Kim had shattered their trust, their faith in the mission they had been sent to accomplish. But even in the face of certain death, they knew that they had to keep fighting, to keep struggling against the darkness that threatened to consume them all. For the sake of humanity, for the sake of all that they held dear, they would not give up, not until their last breath. As Captain Johnson and Rachel charged towards Dr. Kim, time seemed to slow down. The self-destruct sequence was ticking away. The alien ship was closing in, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Dr. Kim raised his gun, his finger tightening on the trigger, but Captain Johnson was faster. With a lightning-quick movement, he grabbed Dr. Kim's wrist and twisted, sending the gun flying across the room. Rachel lunged forward, slamming into Dr. Kim with all her might. The two of them tumbled to the ground, grappling and clawing at each other with a desperate, primal fury. Captain Johnson ran to the escape pod controls, his fingers flying over the console as he tried to initiate the launch sequence, but the ship's systems were failing, the damage from the alien attack taking its toll. Come on, he growled, slamming his fist against the console in frustration. Behind him, Rachel and Dr. Kim were still struggling, their bodies locked together in a deadly embrace. Dr. Kim had managed to get his hands around Rachel's throat, his fingers squeezing with a manic, desperate strength. But Rachel was a fighter. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, she brought her knee up, slamming it into Dr. Kim's groin with a sickening crunch. Dr. Kim howled in pain and loosened his grip, giving Rachel the opening she needed. She grabbed Dr. Kim by the hair and slammed his head against the floor, again and again, until his eyes rolled back in his head and he went limp. "Captain!" she cried out. "The escape pods!" Captain Johnson nodded, his face etched with grim determination. He hit the final sequence of buttons, and the escape pod doors slid open with a hiss. "Get in," he ordered, grabbing Rachel by the arm and pulling her towards the pod. But as they climbed inside, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. It was the sound of the alien creatures, their claws skittering and scraping against the metal hull of the ship as they closed in. Captain Johnson sealed the escape pod doors, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that they only had seconds before the creatures were upon them. "Launch!" he cried out, slamming his hand down on the ignition button. The escape pod shuddered and jolted as its engines roared to life, propelling them away from the doomed Prometheus and out into the void of space. Behind them, they could see the alien ship looming, its massive form blotting out the stars. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the Prometheus exploded, its reactor core detonating in a massive burst of energy that tore the ship apart from the inside out. The shockwave hit the escape pod like a hammer, sending it tumbling end over end through the void. Captain Johnson and Rachel clung to their seats, their bodies battered and bruised as they were thrown about like rag dolls. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The escape pod righted itself, its stabilizers kicking in and bringing them back under control. Captain Johnson let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he gripped the controls. He looked over at Rachel, saw the pain and exhaustion etched on her face. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We got away." But even as he said the words, he knew that their ordeal was far from over. They were adrift in space, with no way to contact Earth and no idea what lay ahead. And somewhere out there, in the vast, cold emptiness of the void, the alien ship was waiting, its purpose and its nature still a terrifying mystery. Captain Johnson knew that they had to find a way to warn Earth, to tell them about the terrible truth they had uncovered. But for now, all they could do was try to survive, to cling to each other, and to the desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way to make it home. As the escape pod drifted through the stars, Captain Johnson and Rachel huddled together, their hearts heavy with the weight of all they had lost and all they had yet to face. The horror of the alien threat loomed large in their minds, a spectre of death and destruction that threatened to consume everything they held dear. But even in the face of that terrible knowledge, they knew that they had to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. For the sake of humanity, for the sake of all the lives that hung in the balance, they would not give up, not until their last breath. Dr. Evelyn Pearce, the sole survivor of the ill-fated mission to Venus, sat in the debriefing room, her eyes haunted and her face pale. She had been through hell, had seen horrors that no human being should ever have to witness, and now she was the only one left to tell the tale. The room was cold and sterile, the walls lined with monitors and screens that displayed the insignia of the various government agencies that had gathered to hear her story. Men and women in dark suits and crisp uniforms sat around the table, their faces grim and their eyes watchful. Dr. Pearce took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she began to speak. She told them everything, from the moment they had first received the mysterious signal from Venus to the final, desperate escape from the doomed Prometheus. She told them about the alien base they had discovered, about the terrible creatures that had stalked them through the ship's corridors, and the massive, world-consuming ship that had loomed over them like a harbinger of doom. And she told them about the betrayal of Dr. Kim, about the terrible truth he had revealed in his final moments, that the government had known about the aliens all along, had been working with them to manipulate and control humanity from the shadows. The room was silent as Dr. Pearce finished her story, the weight of her words hanging in the air, like a physical presence. And then, one by one, the men and women around the table began to speak. They told her that they had known about the aliens for decades, that they had been preparing for their arrival in secret, building underground bunkers and stockpiling weapons and supplies. They told her that the mission to Venus had been a necessary sacrifice, a way to draw the aliens out into the open so that they could be confronted and defeated. And they told her that she was now a part of something much larger than herself, a global effort to protect humanity from the terrible threat that loomed on the horizon. Dr. Pearce listened to their words, her heart heavy with the weight of all she had endured. She knew that the fight against the aliens would be long and hard, that there would be sacrifices and losses along the way. But she also knew that she had no choice but to join the fight, to use the knowledge and experience she had gained to help humanity in its darkest hour. And so, with a heavy heart and a grim determination, Dr. Evelyn Pearce stepped forward into her new role as a member of the global task force dedicated to combating the alien menace. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, that the odds were stacked against them in every way imaginable. But she also knew that they had to try, that the fate of humanity itself hung in the balance. And so, with a final, determined nod, she turned to face the future, ready to fight for the survival of her species, no matter the cost. As the task force began its work, Dr. Pearce could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. She knew that the fate of the world rested in their hands, that every decision they made could mean the difference between life and death for millions of people. But even in the face of that terrible burden, she felt a flicker of hope, a stubborn, unyielding belief that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way to prevail. For the sake of all those who had been lost, for the sake of all those who still lived and breathed and hoped and dreamed, they would fight on until the very end. And though the future was dark and uncertain, though the path ahead was fraught with peril and despair, Dr. Pearce knew that as long as there was still breath in her body and fire in her heart, she would never give up, never surrender, never stop fighting for the fate of the world and all those who called it home. The end, or is it?